Elias laughed, dismissing his son's cries as childish antics. "Just a scratch, boy," he thought, turning away. But the child's tiny, trembling voice, whispering the cleaner's name, shattered his perfect world forever. The polished mahogany doors of his study swung open, revealing Elias Vance, a man whose life was a meticulously curated masterpiece of success and solitude. His bespoke suit still carried the faint scent of a transatlantic flight, a reminder of the global empire he commanded with an almost surgical precision. He had just returned, a whirlwind of high-stakes negotiations and board meetings behind him, ready to reclaim the quiet luxury of his sprawling estate. The mansion, a testament to his ambition and impeccable taste, usually offered a sanctuary of hushed efficiency, maintained by a small, discreet staff. Yet, as he stepped past the threshold, an unsettling silence hung in the air, a stillness that felt heavier than usual, pressing against the opulence of marble floors and soaring ceilings. It was a silence that spoke not of peace, but of an absence, a void where the light-hearted sounds of children should have been, a stark contrast to the vibrant energy his late wife, Clara, had once infused into every corner of their home. His footsteps echoed, unnervingly loud, as he moved through the grand foyer, past the abstract art and gleaming surfaces, his heart beginning to thump with an unfamiliar tremor. Elias, a man accustomed to commanding rooms and dictating terms, found himself suddenly adrift in his own home, a place that had become more of a monument to his grief than a living space since Clara's sudden departure during the birth of their youngest. He had buried himself in work, in the relentless pursuit of more, believing that material success could somehow fill the gaping chasm left by her absence. This emotional void had left him distant, a specter in the lives of his two young children, Lily, a bright-eyed girl of 6, and little Thomas, barely a year old, whose innocent eyes often held a question Elias couldn't answer. He had entrusted their care, their very well-being, to Maria, the housekeeper, a woman whose impeccable uniform and perpetually serene smile had always seemed to embody reliability and warmth. Maria, with her neat bun and understated demeanor, had been a fixture in their lives for years, even before Clara's passing. She moved through the mansion with a quiet efficiency, her presence a comforting, almost invisible hum in the background of their busy lives. After Clara's loss, Maria had seamlessly stepped into a more prominent role, her steady hands managing the household and, ostensibly, the children, with a dedication that Elias had found both reassuring and convenient. He had seen her as a godsend, a pillar of stability in a world that had crumbled around him. He had paid her generously, offered benefits beyond the standard, believing that such provisions guaranteed loyalty and exceptional care. He had often observed her with a soft gaze upon the children, her voice gentle, her movements deliberate, reinforcing his belief in her unwavering devotion. But as he approached the nursery now, a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached him, a whimpering that seemed to be stifled, followed by a sharp, hushed command. His brow furrowed, a sense of unease blossoming in his chest. He pushed open the heavy oak door, expecting to find Maria tending to the children, perhaps reading a story, or gently rocking the baby. Instead, the scene that unfolded before him was a tableau of unsettling stillness, an image that would forever sear itself into his memory. Lily, his usually vivacious daughter, was huddled in a corner, her small frame trembling, her face streaked with tears, a faint red mark visible on her arm. Little Thomas lay silently in his crib, his face unusually pale, his eyes wide and vacant. Maria stood over them, her back to Elias, her hand raised, not in comfort, but in a gesture that seemed to hover menacingly. Then, a whisper, so fragile it barely reached him, escaped Lily's lips, a desperate plea that twisted Elias's heart with a pain far sharper than any business defeat. "Cleaner, my arm hurts so much," she whimpered, her voice barely audible, laced with a raw terror that froze Elias to the spot. "Please, no more." Maria whirled around, her serene smile instantly plastered on her face, but her eyes, for a fleeting moment, held a flicker of something cold and calculating, a shadow that contradicted the warmth she usually projected. Elias stood there, a successful man, a millionaire, utterly paralyzed by the raw, unadulterated fear in his daughter's voice, a fear directed not at a monster from a bedtime story, but at the woman he had trusted implicitly with his most precious treasures. His perfect world, built on a foundation of wealth and carefully constructed illusions, began to crack, the sounds of its shattering echoing deafeningly in his ears. Maria's perfect smile, a mask expertly donned, returned instantly, erasing the chilling flicker Elias had seen in her eyes. "Oh, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice a soft, practiced murmur. "Lily just had a little tumble, a silly tantrum, over a toy." She points to a small, unassuming bruise on Lily's knee, a testament to childhood scrapes, trying to divert his gaze from the angry red mark on her arm. "Lily, darling, tell your father what happened," she prompted, her tone saccharine sweet. Yet Elias sensed an undercurrent of steel, a silent command in her eyes that made his daughter shrink further into the corner, her fragile silence a stark contrast to Maria's composed explanation. "Thomas," Maria added, gently patting the baby's head, "is just a little sleepy, a long day of play." Elias, still reeling from the sudden shift, found himself grasping at her words, wanting desperately to believe the convenient narrative, to push back the terrifying implication of Lily's plea. His mind, trained in the cutthroat world of corporate mergers and acquisitions, struggled to reconcile the image of the devoted housekeeper with the raw terror he had just witnessed. He knelt, his expensive suit creasing, his hand reaching out for Lily, but she flinched, a tiny, involuntary movement that pierced his heart more deeply than any accusation. It was a reflex, he thought, a child's natural shyness, but the image of her trembling form and the fresh mark on her arm burned into his consciousness. He tried to speak, to ask her directly, but the words caught in his throat, choked by a sudden, overwhelming wave of guilt. He had been so absent, so consumed by his empire and his grief, that he had allowed a stranger to become the primary caretaker of his children, mistaking professional diligence for genuine affection. His wealth, his success, felt like a hollow mockery in that moment, unable to protect his most vulnerable treasures from an unseen threat lurking within the very walls of his home. He mumbled something about being tired from the trip, a flimsy excuse to retreat, to process the jarring reality that had just shattered his carefully constructed peace. Over the next few days, Elias's usual routine, once a comforting rhythm, became a strained performance. He found himself watching Maria, his gaze lingering a moment too long, seeking discrepancies in her flawless facade. Her movements remained graceful, her smile unwavering. But now, he noticed the way her grip tightened on Lily's arm when she thought no one was looking. A fleeting, almost imperceptible squeeze that made Lily wince. He saw the way she would usher the children into the nursery, closing the heavy oak door with a soft click, a sound that now resonated with an ominous finality, and the subsequent muffled cries that would eventually fade into an unsettling quiet. He recalled Lily's earlier whimpers, the very sounds he had dismissed as childish antics, now replaying in his mind with a chilling clarity. The gentle hum of the mansion, once a symbol of his well-ordered life, now felt like a silent accomplice to a hidden cruelty. Maria, sensing a shift in Elias's demeanor, doubled down on her subservience, anticipating his every need, preparing his favorite meals, ensuring his study was always immaculate. She would bring Thomas to him, cooing over the baby, displaying an almost theatrical affection, But Elias noticed the baby's unusual stillness in her arms, a lack of the joyful wriggles he remembered from Clara's time. He tried to engage Lily in conversation, asking about her day, about Maria, but his daughter, usually so chatty, would only offer monosyllabic answers, her eyes darting nervously towards the housekeeper, a silent plea for discretion. It was a subtle dance of manipulation and dawning suspicion, played out in the opulent rooms of the Vance mansion, each participant carefully guarding their true intentions. Elias, once blind to anything beyond his spreadsheets and boardrooms, now found his senses heightened. Every subtle change in the children's laughter, every hushed tone from Maria, a potential clue in a terrifying puzzle. The first undeniable sign came one evening when he decided to check on the children after Maria had put them to bed. He found the nursery door locked from the outside, a small, intricate latch he hadn't noticed before, securing it firmly. A cold dread seeped into his bones. He fumbled with the lock, his heart hammering against his ribs, and when the door finally yielded, he stepped into a dimly lit room where Lily lay curled in her bed, her small body trembling, silent tears tracking paths down her flushed cheeks. Thomas whimpered softly in his crib, his tiny fists clenched. There was no visible mark, no overt sign of violence, but the palpable fear in the room, the locked door, and the children's silent distress screamed a truth that Elias could no longer ignore. He scooped Lily into his arms, holding her close, feeling the fragile rhythm of her heart against his own, a silent promise forming in his mind that he would uncover the truth, no matter how painful, no matter the cost. His absence had been a betrayal, but his presence now would be an unyielding shield. The image of Lily's trembling form and Thomas's silent distress, coupled with the chilling discovery of the locked nursery door, shattered the last vestiges of Elias's denial. He held Lily tightly, her small body a fragile weight in his arms, feeling the tremor that ran through her, a silent scream of fear that resonated deep within his own soul. He murmured soft apologies into her hair, words of comfort he hadn't offered in years, his voice rough with unshed tears and a burgeoning rage he had never known. The opulent room, once a symbol of security, now felt like a gilded cage, a place where his children had suffered in silence, unseen and unheard. He carried Lily back to her bed, gently tucking her in, then sat by Thomas's crib, his large hand resting protectively on the baby's back, a silent vigil against the darkness that had crept into their lives. The night passed in a haze of guilt and fierce resolve, Elias vowing that he would never again be blinded by ambition or grief, that his children's safety would be his singular, unwavering focus. The following morning, Maria appeared as usual, her smile radiating an almost disconcerting cheerfulness, her uniform crisp and unblemished. Elias, still reeling from the previous night, watched her with new, unsettling eyes. He confronted her about the locked door, his voice carefully controlled, masking the fury that churned within him. He asked her, his tone deceptively calm, why the nursery door had been secured from the outside last night. Maria's eyes, for a fleeting second, betrayed a flicker of surprise, a shadow of calculation, before her practiced mask slipped back into place. "Oh, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice laced with an exaggerated concern, "it must have been an oversight, a terrible accident. Lily has been so restless lately. She sometimes tries to wander in the night, and I must have forgotten to unlock it after checking on her." She offered a plausible, almost too perfect explanation, her gaze unwavering, her hands clasped demurely. But Elias saw through the performance, the subtle tremor in her posture, the way her eyes avoided meeting his directly for more than a moment. He began his subtle investigation, a meticulous process alien to his usual direct approach. He installed discreet cameras, cleverly disguised within the mansion's elaborate decor, focusing on the children's wing and common areas where Maria spent most of her time. He started to observe Maria with an almost scientific detachment, noting the subtle cues he had previously missed. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she interacted with the children. The sudden stiffness in Lily's posture when Maria approached. The baby's almost unnatural quietness in her presence. He noticed the pattern of Lily's accidental falls and bruises, always appearing when he was absent, always explained away by Maria with a practiced ease. The faint red mark on Lily's arm, the locked door, the stifled whimpers, all coalesced into a terrifying mosaic of calculated cruelty, a silent testament to the abuse his children had endured under his very roof. Driven by a desperate need for answers and a vague memory of Clara mentioning something about Maria's past, Elias began sifting through his late wife's personal effects, a task he had avoided for years, fearing the pain it would evoke. He went into Clara's old study, a room preserved exactly as she had left it, the scent of her favorite lavender lingering faintly in the air. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, filtering through the tall windows as he opened a forgotten cedar chest, filled with her journals, old letters, and cherished mementos. His fingers brushed against a thick, cream-colored envelope, tucked beneath a stack of old photographs. It was Clara's elegant handwriting, addressed to him, dated just weeks before her passing. His heart throbbed with a mixture of grief and a burgeoning sense of foreboding as he carefully opened it. The letter, penned with Clara's characteristic grace, spoke of her love for him and the children, but then her tone shifted, becoming more cautious, more troubled. She wrote of Maria, of a growing unease she felt towards the housekeeper. "I've noticed a change in Maria, my dearest," she had written. "She seems overly possessive of the children, especially Lily. And there's a strange possessiveness in her gaze when she looks at our family heirlooms. I overheard her speaking on the phone once, her voice sharp and bitter, about how some people get everything handed to them, how unfair life can be. She even mentioned something about a past injustice, a family inheritance she felt cheated out of. Clara had detailed a few unsettling incidents, a misplaced valuable, a cryptic comment Maria made about deserving more, a moment when Clara found Maria staring at her wedding ring with an intensity that chilled her to the bone. Clara's words were not an accusation, but a heartfelt warning, a mother's instinct sensing a predatory shadow lurking beneath a veneer of devotion. Elias read the letter again, his hands trembling, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a horrifying clarity. Maria's subservience was a facade, her devotion a meticulously crafted illusion, concealing a deep-seated resentment and a calculating greed that now threatened to consume his family. The letter was a ghost of a warning from his beloved Clara, a final act of protection from beyond, compelling him to open his eyes to the truth. The chilling words from Clara's letter, a silent warning from beyond the grave, echoed in Elias's mind, amplifying the dread that had taken root in his heart. He felt a profound, searing guilt for his blindness, for allowing his grief and ambition to overshadow the most sacred duty of a parent. The sophisticated security system he had installed, initially a measure for protecting his material assets, now became his most vital tool for uncovering the truth about his children's well-being. He spent hours in his study, the room's usual quiet now a heavy shroud, meticulously reviewing the camera footage, his eyes fixed on the screens, searching for the subtle signs Clara had mentioned, the cruelties Lily's small voice had hinted at. What unfolded before him was a horrifying ballet of manipulation and quiet torment, a stark contrast to the serene facade Maria presented to him. He watched Maria, not the diligent housekeeper he thought he knew, but a woman whose eyes held a cold, calculating glint when she believed herself unobserved. He saw her gently place Thomas in his crib, only to yank his tiny blanket away moments later, leaving the baby to whimper in the cold, his cries growing weaker with neglect. He witnessed her approach Lily, her smile wide and seemingly kind, only to whisper sharp, intimidating words into the little girl's ear, making Lily's shoulders slump and her eyes fill with tears. There were moments when Maria would deliberately trip Lily, making it look like an accident, then scold her for being clumsy, tightening her grip on Lily's arm just enough to leave a faint, red imprint, exactly as Lily had described. Elias saw the locked nursery door, not an oversight as Maria had claimed, but a deliberate act, a way to isolate the children, to control their fear and silence their pleas. Each frame of the video was a dagger to his heart, revealing the extent of Maria's insidious cruelty, a slow, methodical chipping away at his children's innocence and spirit. The footage also confirmed Clara's suspicions about Maria's fixation on their family's wealth. Elias watched as Maria, believing the house empty, would linger in Clara's study, her fingers tracing the expensive bindings of books, her gaze lingering on a framed photograph of Clara wearing her wedding ring, the very one Clara had mentioned in her letter. He saw her discreetly open a small antique jewelry box on Clara's vanity, not to clean, but to examine the glittering contents with an avaricious gleam in her eyes, a silent testament to the greed that fueled her actions. She would often stand before the grand fireplace in the living room, staring at the family portrait, a strange mix of envy and resentment twisting her features, her lips occasionally moving in a silent, bitter monologue. It was clear that Maria saw herself not as a servant, but as someone entitled to a share of the Vance fortune, believing that life had unjustly denied her what she deserved. A deep-seated bitterness festering beneath her polished exterior. Armed with this irrefutable visual evidence, and driven by a primal urge to protect his children, Elias began to shift his approach. He stopped feigning ignorance, instead creating opportunities to spend genuine, uninterrupted time with Lily and Thomas. He would take Lily to the sprawling gardens, letting her choose flowers, listening intently as she hesitantly recounted simple stories, her voice still small and fragile, but gaining a whisper of confidence with each passing moment of his undivided attention. He would hold Thomas for long stretches, rocking him gently, singing soft lullabies that Clara used to sing, feeling the baby's tiny body relax against his, a tentative connection forming between them. Maria, ever watchful, tried to insert herself into these moments, offering to help, but Elias would politely yet firmly decline, his gaze unwavering, signaling a boundary she had never dared to cross before. The children, sensing their father's renewed presence and unwavering protection, began to show subtle signs of healing. Lily, though still wary, would sometimes lean into his embrace, her small hand clutching his shirt, a silent plea for reassurance. Thomas, once unnaturally quiet, started to gurgle and smile more often when Elias was near, his eyes sparkling with an innocent joy that had been absent for too long. Elias felt a profound shift within himself, the cold armor of grief and ambition slowly melting away, replaced by a fierce, unconditional love that transcended all his past failings. He understood now that his true wealth lay not in his empire, but in the fragile, precious lives of his children. He continued to gather more evidence, documenting every bruise, every withdrawn glance, every instance of Maria's manipulative behavior, knowing that the truth, no matter how painful, was the only path to justice and to reclaiming his family's peace. The quiet mansion, once a place of silent suffering, was slowly beginning to hum with the nascent sounds of a father's love, a love powerful enough to confront the darkness that had sought to extinguish their light. The quiet hum of the mansion, once a sanctuary, now felt charged with an unspoken tension, a silent battle being waged beneath its opulent surface. Maria, accustomed to Elias's prolonged absences and emotional detachment, found his constant presence an increasingly suffocating weight. Her practiced smile, once so effortless, now felt stretched and brittle, a thin veneer over a simmering frustration. She would hover, offering unsolicited advice on Lily's meals or Thomas's nap schedule, her voice maintaining its saccharine sweetness, yet Elias could detect the sharp edge of resentment beneath her words, the subtle attempts to reassert her control over the children he was now fiercely guarding. He would meet her gaze with a calm, unwavering intensity she had never seen before, a silent refusal to yield, a quiet strength that chipped away at her carefully constructed confidence. She began to make small, uncharacteristic errors, leaving a door ajar, forgetting a routine, her meticulous facade showing faint, telling cracks. Elias, no longer a distant figure lost in the labyrinth of his grief and ambition, had fully embraced his role as protector. He spent countless hours immersed in the world of his children, rediscovering the simple joys he had long neglected. He would read to Lily, his deep voice softening as he navigated the whimsical tales of talking animals and faraway lands, watching as her eyes, once shadowed with fear, now sparkled with a nascent wonder. He would spend long afternoons in the nursery, holding Thomas, feeling the baby's tiny fingers curl around his own, a profound connection blossoming in the quiet moments of shared warmth. These moments were not just for the children's healing, but for his own, a balm to the wounds of his past neglect, a reaffirmation of the unconditional love that had always resided within him, dormant but never truly extinguished. The children, sensing the genuine shift in their father, began to unfurl like delicate blossoms, their laughter returning, soft at first, then growing bolder, echoing through the halls that had once known only muffled whimpers. Maria, observing this blossoming connection, felt a corrosive envy twist within her. She had seen Elias's wealth, his grand life, as something unjustly bestowed, a prize she felt she deserved, a recompense for a lifetime of perceived slights and unfulfilled desires. The children, in her warped perception, were merely pawns in her game, a means to secure her place, to exert her power within the Vance empire. Now, with Elias's unexpected transformation, her carefully laid plans felt threatened, slipping through her grasp like sand. She began to escalate her subtle cruelties, though always when Elias was out of sight, believing her actions remained hidden. She would hide Lily's favorite doll, then feign surprise when the child cried, chiding her for being forgetful. She would leave Thomas's bottle just out of reach, watching his tiny struggles with a detached amusement. But Elias, armed with his hidden cameras and renewed vigilance, saw everything. Each act, no matter how small, was meticulously recorded, a damning testament to her true nature. He had engaged a trusted, discreet legal team, presenting them with Clara's letter and the growing mountain of video evidence. The lawyers, initially skeptical of a housekeeper's calculated malice, were quickly swayed by the irrefutable footage, their expressions shifting from professional detachment to quiet horror. They began to build a case, not just for dismissal, but for a formal accusation, highlighting the psychological and physical abuse, the systematic manipulation, and the clear intent to exploit the family's wealth. Elias, guided by their counsel, maintained his composed exterior, allowing Maria to believe her charade was still intact, even as the walls began to close in around her. He knew that confronting her prematurely would only give her an opportunity to flee or destroy further evidence, and he was determined that justice, true and unwavering, would be served. One evening, as Elias reviewed another tranche of footage, he saw Maria in Clara's study, not just admiring the jewelry, but meticulously searching through a locked drawer in Clara's antique desk, her movements precise and deliberate. She pulled out a small, leather-bound ledger, flipping through its pages with an almost frantic intensity, her eyes scanning for something specific. Elias remembered Clara mentioning a family trust, a separate account established for the children's future, managed by a remote financial advisor. Maria's desperate search confirmed his suspicions. She wasn't just interested in trinkets. She was after a larger prize, a substantial portion of the children's inheritance. This revelation added another layer of calculated malice to her actions, transforming her from a cruel caregiver into a predatory schemer, her motives far more sinister than simple resentment. The weight of this discovery pressed down on Elias, intensifying his resolve. He understood now the full scope of Maria's betrayal, her willingness to harm innocent children for monetary gain. His grief for Clara intertwined with a fierce protective instinct for Lily and Thomas, fueling a cold, steady fury. He knew the time for passive observation was drawing to a close. The evidence was overwhelming, the narrative clear, and the need for action immediate. He watched Maria's retreating figure on the screen, her back to the camera, her shoulders slumped in what he now knew was not weariness, but frustrated greed. He felt a profound shift within him, a final shedding of the emotional paralysis that had plagued him since Clara's passing. He was no longer just a grieving widower or a successful businessman. He was a father, ready to fight with every fiber of his being for his children's safety and their future, prepared to confront the darkness head-on, no matter the personal cost. The stage was set, and the truth, like a relentless tide, was about to crash against Maria's fragile fortress of lies. Maria's facade, once impenetrable, now wore thin, stretched taut by Elias's unwavering gaze and the children's burgeoning joy. She felt the shift in the mansion's atmosphere, a coldness emanating from Elias that mirrored the one she carefully concealed. Her movements became less fluid, more jerky, her smile a strained grimace that barely reached her eyes. She would find herself lingering, watching Elias interact with Lily and Thomas, a bitter envy twisting her features. The laughter, once suppressed, now echoed with a defiant cheerfulness through the grand halls, a sound she had tried so hard to silence. She saw her carefully constructed world of control crumbling, and in her desperation, her actions grew bolder, more reckless. She began to subtly sabotage Elias's attempts at connection, misplacing Lily's favorite drawing book right before their reading time, or accidentally spilling juice on Thomas's special blanket, hoping to incite frustration and reassert her dominance. But Elias, ever vigilant, saw through each thinly veiled attempt, his patience a steel trap waiting to spring. Elias, meanwhile, reveled in the tender moments with his children, each interaction a thread weaving back the tapestry of their family. He had started a new ritual, a nightly story time where Lily, nestled safely in his lap, would choose a book, her small finger tracing the vibrant illustrations. Thomas, often in a nearby bassinet, would gurgle softly, his eyes wide, captivated by the rhythm of his father's voice. Elias would hold them close, breathing in their sweet, innocent scent, feeling the warmth of their bodies against his, a profound sense of purpose filling the void that Clara's departure had left. He felt their trust slowly returning, a precious, fragile gift, and it fueled his resolve to protect them, to ensure that the darkness Maria had brought into their lives would be banished forever. He saw Lily's small wounds, both visible and invisible, slowly begin to heal, her spirit regaining its vibrant light, a testament to the power of his rediscovered love. His legal team, discreet and efficient, had been working tirelessly, compiling the extensive video evidence, cross-referencing Clara's letter with financial records, and identifying patterns of suspicious activity in Maria's personal accounts. They discovered a series of large, unexplained cash deposits that coincided with Elias's extended business trips, a damning testament to Maria's opportunistic theft. They also unearthed a distant, estranged relative of Maria's who had once worked in Clara's family estate years ago, a woman who, under the promise of anonymity, revealed a history of manipulative behavior and a bitter grievance Maria held against wealthy families, stemming from a perceived inheritance slight in her own past. This provided a crucial piece of the puzzle, a motive beyond simple greed, rooted in a deep-seated resentment that poisoned her every action. Maria, increasingly agitated by Elias's unyielding presence and the children's growing attachment to him, made a final, desperate move. One afternoon, while Elias was briefly on a call in his study, she slipped into Clara's private office, believing it was her last chance to access the children's trust ledger. Her hands trembled as she forced open the locked drawer, her eyes darting nervously around the room, a frantic hunger in her gaze. She found the ledger, its pages bound in rich leather, and began to frantically photograph its contents with her phone. Her plan to siphon funds from the children's future now laid bare. Unbeknownst to her, Elias's most advanced camera, disguised as a decorative antique clock, captured every minute detail of her illicit act. The flash of her phone, a silent, damning indictment of her avarice and deceit. This was the final piece, the irrefutable evidence that connected her abuse of the children directly to her predatory financial motives. Elias, watching the live feed from his study, felt a cold, calculated calm settle over him. The image of Maria's avaricious face, illuminated by the flash of her phone, solidified his resolve. There was no longer any room for doubt or hesitation. He knew precisely what he had to do. He closed his laptop, the click echoing in the sudden silence of his study, and walked purposefully towards the intercom, his hand steady as he pressed the button. He summoned Maria to his study, his voice devoid of emotion, a quiet command that left no room for argument. The time for quiet observation was over. The truth had been unearthed, piece by painful piece, and now it was time for justice to be served, for the darkness to be exposed to the harsh light of accountability. He glanced at a framed photograph of Clara on his desk, a faint, reassuring smile on her face, feeling her presence, a silent strength guiding his hand as he prepared to confront the malevolence that had threatened to consume everything he held dear. The mansion, once a place of silent suffering, was about to become the stage for a reckoning, a battle for the very soul of his family. Maria arrived in Elias's study moments later, her steps still outwardly composed, but a tremor, almost imperceptible, ran through her posture. Her eyes, usually serene, darted around the opulent room, searching for a clue, a hint of the reason for this unexpected summons. Elias stood by the vast window, his back to her, the afternoon light casting his silhouette in a way that made him seem monumental, unyielding. He turned slowly, his face a mask of calm, a quiet authority replacing the distant sorrow she had grown accustomed to. There was no anger in his gaze, only a deep, unsettling resolve that sent a shiver down her spine, a primal warning that her carefully constructed world was about to shatter. She offered a practiced, polite query, asking if he needed anything, her voice a little too sweet, a little too eager. Elias did not respond immediately, instead gesturing towards the large monitor on his desk, its screen displaying a frozen image of Clara's study. Maria's breath hitched, a faint, almost inaudible sound as her eyes landed on the image of herself, her hands forcing open the antique desk drawer, the ledger clearly visible. Her flawless composure began to crack, a tremor starting in her hands, then spreading to her lips. She tried to dismiss it, to conjure an excuse, perhaps claiming she was merely tidying, but the image was too damning, too specific. Elias's voice, when he finally spoke, was low and steady, devoid of the theatrical rage she might have expected, which only made it more terrifying. He told her he had been watching, not just for an hour, but for weeks, explaining that every subtle cruelty, every manipulation, every moment of avarice had been meticulously recorded, a silent testament to her true nature. He walked to the desk, pressing a button, and the screen flickered to life, showing a montage of her transgressions. Maria watched, paralyzed, as her own image played out. The deliberate yanking of Thomas's blanket, the whispered threats to Lily, the feigned trips, the cruel smiles when she thought no one was looking, and finally, the blatant act of photographing the children's trust ledger. Each frame was a hammer blow to her self-deception, revealing the monster she had so carefully hidden beneath her veneer of dedication. Her face, once so placid, contorted with a mixture of disbelief, fear, and a burning, desperate rage. She tried to interrupt, to deny, her voice rising in a shrill, desperate protest, but Elias simply raised a hand, a silent command that brooked no argument, and the horrifying reel continued to play, laying bare her calculated malice for all to see. When the screen finally went dark, the silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by Maria's ragged breathing. Her entire body trembled, her eyes darting wildly between Elias and the monitor, seeking an escape, a loophole, any way to twist the narrative back to her favor. She lashed out, her voice a venomous hiss, accusing Elias of being a negligent father, of being too blind with grief to see anything, of blaming an innocent woman for his own shortcomings. She screamed that she had done everything for his children, that she had been the one truly caring for them while he was lost in his empire, her words a torrent of bitter resentment, fueled by years of perceived injustice and the gnawing envy that had consumed her. She declared that she deserved a share, that his wealth was ill-gotten, that life had dealt her a cruel hand, and she was simply taking what was owed to her, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into a heap of raw, unbridled fury. Elias listened, his expression unwavering, allowing her outburst to run its course, a necessary catharsis before the final reckoning. He saw not a woman lashing out in anger, but a cornered predator, stripped of her disguise, revealing the depth of her twisted motivations. He knew her resentment was deep, her sense of entitlement profound, but it did not, could not, justify the pain she had inflicted on his innocent children. When she finally fell silent, exhausted by her own venom, Elias spoke again, his voice still calm, but now infused with an ironclad authority that brooked no further argument. He told her that her services were no longer required, that the police and his legal team were already on their way, and that she would face the full consequences of her actions, not just for the theft, but for the abuse she had systematically inflicted upon Lily and Thomas. Maria's face drained of all color, her defiance replaced by a chilling realization of the inescapable truth. She looked at Elias, truly saw him for the first time, not as the grieving, absent employer, but as a formidable protector, a man who had resurrected himself from the ashes of his sorrow to defend his family. The power had irrevocably shifted. Elias then revealed that Clara, even in her delicate state, had suspected something, had left him clues, a mother's intuition reaching beyond the grave to guide him. Maria's eyes widened in a mixture of horror and grudging admiration, a final, desperate gasp of recognition for the woman she had tried to erase. The sound of approaching sirens, faint at first, then growing steadily louder, began to fill the quiet mansion, signaling the inevitable end of Maria's reign of cruelty and the dawn of a new, hopeful chapter for Elias and his children. The sirens grew louder, their mournful wail cutting through the opulent silence of the mansion, a stark, undeniable herald of justice. Maria, her face a mask of bitter defeat, offered no further resistance as the officers gently but firmly escorted her away. Her final glance at Elias held a complex mixture of hatred and a grudging, almost imperceptible recognition of his strength. a man transformed from his grief-stricken state into an unyielding protector. Elias watched her go, not with triumph, but with a profound sense of weary relief, the weight of a long and harrowing battle finally lifting from his shoulders. He immediately went to Lily and Thomas, holding them close, their small, trembling bodies a tangible reminder of all he had fought for. The mansion, once a stage for silent suffering, now breathed a sigh of collective release, cleansed of the insidious darkness that had permeated its very walls, allowing the healing to truly begin. 2 years later, the grand old mansion hummed with a different kind of energy, a vibrant symphony of life and laughter that echoed through its spacious halls. Elias, his eyes no longer shadowed by grief, moved with a newfound lightness, his presence a constant source of warmth and security for his children. He spent his mornings tending to the expansive gardens with Lily, her small hands carefully planting seeds, her face alight with curiosity as they watched new life unfurl from the earth. Thomas, now a boisterous toddler, chased butterflies across the manicured lawns, his infectious giggles filling the air, a sound Elias cherished above all else. Dinner times were lively affairs, filled with stories and shared jokes, the long mahogany table no longer a monument to absence, but a gathering place for a family, beautifully, painstakingly rebuilt. Elias would often find himself simply watching them, his heart swelling with an overwhelming gratitude, knowing that the journey through darkness had ultimately led them to this profound, unconditional light. Justice, though a slow and arduous path, had ultimately found its way, ensuring Maria faced the full consequences of her actions. Her calculated cruelty had been exposed, her web of deceit untangled, and the protection of the innocent children had prevailed. Elias had not only rescued his children from a manipulative abuser, but had also rescued himself from the suffocating grip of his own sorrow, discovering the boundless depths of a father's love. The memory of Clara, his beloved wife, no longer brought forth a searing pain, but a gentle, guiding presence, a silent testament to the enduring power of family. The mansion, once a symbol of his solitary success and profound loss, was now a sanctuary of healing, redemption, and renewed connection, a testament to the truth that even in the darkest corners of human cruelty, love, when fiercely fought for, can ultimately prevail, leaving behind a legacy of resilience and hope for a brighter future. What lengths would you go to protect a child's innocence, to mend a broken spirit, to reclaim the laughter that was stolen? What truths would you unearth? What fears would you confront, to ensure justice for those who cannot fight for themselves? This story reminds us that the bonds of family are unbreakable, that evil will ultimately face its reckoning, and that the greatest rewards lie in the courage to love unconditionally. If this story moved you, share it, and remember that every child deserves a world filled with safety, joy, and unwavering love.